She didn't walk in asking for anything. She walked in holding something that wasn't hers, and trying to give it back. That's it. That's the whole reason she was there. A wallet. Black leather, thick, barely closing from everything packed inside. Lying on the sidewalk at the corner of 5th and Monroe, on a Tuesday morning in November, when the wind off Lake Michigan cuts right through you and most people just keep their heads down and walk. Dorothy Collins did not keep walking. She picked it up. She checked inside, just enough to find a name and an address. And then this 74-year-old woman, on a fixed income, in orthopedic shoes that had seen better years, boarded a crosstown bus she could barely afford, twice, to return money that was never hers to keep. She arrived at the Grand Alderton Hotel at 11:47 in the morning. The lobby was everything she wasn't, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, a chandelier the size of a small car throwing gold light across guests in wool coats that cost more than her monthly rent. Suited staff moved like they'd been choreographed. Every surface said, "You belong here, or you don't." Dorothy walked to the front desk. And within 4 minutes, a security guard had positioned himself between her and the counter, arms crossed, jaw set, blocking her the way you block someone you've already decided is a problem. Guests nearby shifted. Bags were pulled a little closer. Eyes cut sideways. She was holding the wallet out, visibly, with both hands. It didn't matter. What the people in that lobby didn't know, what Dorothy herself had no way of knowing, was that somewhere above them, on the 14th floor, a man was sitting in front of a security monitor. At some point after she walked through the door, someone upstairs began watching, and what he was about to do, what he was about to say, would be talked about long after that marble floor stopped shining. Her full name was Dorothy May Collins, 74 years old, retired, a widow living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the near west side of Chicago, the same neighborhood she'd lived in for 31 years, though it barely looked the same anymore. New condos going up on every other block. Coffee shops charging $9 for something she could make at home. Neighbors she'd known for decades gone, replaced by young professionals who nodded politely in the hallway and never learned her name. Dorothy learned all of theirs. That was just who she was. She spent 38 years inside the Chicago public school system. 3rd grade, then 5th, then back to 3rd when the school restructured. She taught reading. She taught children who came to school hungry how to sit still long enough to learn something. She stayed after hours. She bought supplies with her own money, quietly, without ever making it anyone else's problem. When she retired, her students sent cards. Hundreds of them. Some were grown by then, with children of their own. They still called her Mrs. Collins. Her husband Raymond died 6 years ago. He was a postal worker for 32 years. Steady man. Quiet. The kind of person who fixed things around the house without being asked, who always had the car warmed up before Dorothy got in, who called her May, her middle name, when he wanted her to know he meant something. She still sets 2 cups on the kitchen counter some mornings before she remembers. She is fine. She is also lonely in the specific, quiet way that people are when they've spent a lifetime being needed, and then suddenly, aren't. Their son Calvin lives overseas now. Work took him there, and then life kept him. He calls when he can. The calls are shorter than they used to be. The time zones make it complicated. Dorothy understands. She tells him she's fine. But here is what you need to understand about Dorothy Collins. She did not shrink. Every morning, she pressed her clothes the night before, even if she was only going to the pharmacy or the bus stop. She said Raymond taught her that. You dress for the day you want, not the day you're given. Every Saturday, she was at her church by 7:30 in the morning to help run the food pantry. She stayed until everything was sorted, packed, and handed out. Then she stayed a little longer to talk to whoever needed talking to. The children in her building called her Miss Dot. She kept hard candy in her coat pocket, the wrapped kind, butterscotch and peppermint, and they knew it. They'd linger near the elevator on the off chance she'd come through. She was not a woman who asked for much. She was not a woman who took what wasn't hers. Which brings us to that Tuesday morning in November. Dorothy left her apartment at 9:30. She was heading to the pharmacy, a 20-minute walk to the bus stop, then 2 stops down. Routine. She had her transit card, exact change for the copay, and the butterscotch candies. She was almost at the stop when she saw it. A wallet. Black leather, thick, barely closing from everything packed inside. Lying on the sidewalk near the bench, like someone had dropped it in a hurry or pulled it out reaching for their phone. Dorothy stopped. She looked up and down the street. Nobody turning back. Nobody patting their pockets in a panic. Just people moving through the cold with their heads down. She picked it up. She didn't rifle through it. She opened it just enough. Driver's license, stack of cards, and tucked behind them, a business card for the Grand Alderton Hotel on Michigan Avenue. Someone's name embossed at the bottom. A title beneath it. She closed the wallet. She thought for a moment. Then she turned around, went back to her apartment to look up the bus route, and planned a trip across town she had not budgeted for, in time or in money. 2 buses. 45 minutes each way in the November cold. She could have left it exactly where she found it and told herself it wasn't her responsibility. She could have used what was inside that wallet. The pension only goes so far. The prescriptions don't get cheaper. There are months when Dorothy Collins does math that nobody should have to do at 74. Lord knows she could have. But that was not who Dorothy Collins was. Not in 38 years of teaching other people's children. Not in a marriage built on decency. Not on a sidewalk in November when nobody was watching. She walked through those doors at 11:47 in the morning. Coat pressed. Gloves on. The wallet was held carefully in both hands like she was delivering something fragile, because to her it was. It belonged to someone. That mattered. The lobby of the Grand Alderton is the kind of space designed to make certain people feel important and everyone else feel small. 40-foot ceilings. A chandelier that cost more than most people's houses. Staff in fitted charcoal uniforms moving with the quiet efficiency of people trained never to look flustered. Dorothy walked to the front desk. The clerk, young, polished, the kind of practiced smile that stops exactly at the eyes, looked up, and then looked at her. Not at her face. At her. The coat. The shoes. The way she'd come in from the cold. Something shifted behind his expression. "Good morning. Are you a guest here?" "No," Dorothy said. "I'm not. I found a wallet this morning near 5th and Monroe, and I believe it belongs to someone staying at this hotel. I'd like to return it." A pause. The kind of pause that isn't about processing information. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside." "Not, thank you." "Not. Let me help you with that." "Step aside." She was directed, not escorted, directed, to wait near the service entrance. Not the seating area in the lobby where guests waited in upholstered chairs. Not the concierge desk 15 feet away staffed by a man who was currently helping someone find a dinner reservation. The service entrance. The door that led to the kitchen corridor, next to a luggage cart and a folded housekeeping sign. She stood there for 11 minutes. A second staff member arrived, a woman this time, senior by her lanyard, who spoke to Dorothy with the exaggerated slowness people use when they've decided someone doesn't fully understand things. "So you found a wallet?" "Yes," Dorothy said, her voice even. "This morning, on 5th and Monroe. There was a business card for this hotel inside. And you just picked it up." The way she said it. Like picking up a lost wallet and returning it was itself suspicious behavior. Dorothy held her composure the way you only can when you've spent decades holding it in rooms that gave you every reason not to. Then a hotel guest, a man in his 50s cashmere coat, a drink already in his hand before noon, turned from the concierge desk and looked directly at the staff member. "Excuse me, why is she standing here?" Not concerned. Not asking on Dorothy's behalf. The staff member glanced at him, glanced at Dorothy, and said nothing. Did nothing. Just let the question hang in the air like it was reasonable. Like it deserved consideration. Dorothy heard it. She was meant to hear it. The assistant manager arrived 4 minutes later. His name tag said Derek. He had the bearing of a man who'd been given just enough authority to be dangerous with it. Shoulders back, voice measured, eyes that moved over Dorothy the way an investigators do when the verdict is already forming. He did not introduce himself. He looked at the wallet on the counter where Dorothy had placed it and said, "Where exactly did you find this?" "Not. Thank you for bringing this in." "Not. I appreciate you making the trip." "Where?" "Exactly." "Corner of 5th and Monroe," Dorothy said. "Near the bus stop. By the bench." And there was no one around when you found it. Again, not a question. A test. There were people around, Dorothy said carefully. But no one looking for it. No one had dropped it that I could see. Derek nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has already decided what he thinks and is simply cataloging your answers for later. Can I see some identification? Dorothy looked at him. 74 years old. A retired schoolteacher. 45 minutes on 2 buses in November cold. Holding something that was never hers, trying to give it back. You want my identification, she said. It's standard procedure. It was not standard procedure. And then the security guard stepped closer. He didn't say anything. He simply repositioned himself, moved to her left side, half a step behind her, and placed one hand on her shoulder. Firm. The way you hold someone you're preparing to move. Dorothy went very still. She reached into her coat pocket. The guard's hand tightened. She had felt this before. Decades of it. And she was 74 years old, and she was tired of feeling it. Her voice, when it came, had a tremor in it. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something that lives in the body of a black woman in America who has stood in rooms like this before. Not this lobby, not this city, maybe, but this exact room. This exact feeling. She pulled out the wallet, slowly, deliberately, and set it on the counter with both hands. I didn't come here for trouble, she said. I came here because it was right. Derek called the front desk from the counter phone. Asked them to check whether anyone had reported a missing wallet. While he waited for the answer, while he stood there holding the receiver, waiting, he left Dorothy standing where she was. In the middle of the lobby. In front of the guests. In front of the staff. In front of everyone. No chair offered. No apology forming. Just standing there. Being made to wait again, in a different spot now, for a different reason, but with the same message underneath it. You don't belong here. And we don't owe you anything. Across the lobby, near the concierge lounge, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting with what looked like her grandmother, had gone completely still. She was watching Dorothy. Children notice things adults have learned to look past. She wasn't frightened. She was paying attention, the way children do when something feels wrong, but they don't have the words yet. Dorothy glanced over and saw her. And despite everything, the guard still close, the manager still on the phone, the lobby still watching, Dorothy looked at that little girl and smiled at her. Gently. The way she had smiled at children for 38 years. The little girl did not look away. The elevator doors opened at 12:03 in the afternoon. Nobody in the lobby marked it at first. But the staff noticed. Not all at once. One by one, like a current passing through the room. The bellman near the entrance straightened almost imperceptibly. The woman at the concierge desk stopped mid-sentence. The front desk clerk who had sent Dorothy to wait by the service entrance looked up from his monitor, and something moved across his face that had not been there a moment before. A man walked out of the elevator. Late 40s. Korean. He was carrying nothing. No phone in his hand. No briefcase. He had simply come downstairs. He had been in the security monitoring suite on the 14th floor, a quarterly infrastructure review scheduled weeks in advance. When the feed from the lobby caught his attention, he stepped into the lobby and stopped. From somewhere near the check-in desk, low, urgent, the kind of whisper that carries precisely because it's trying not to, a voice said, "That's Mr. Seo. That's Chairman Seo." He moved with unhurried authority. His suit was dark, well-cut, nothing on it to announce itself. No visible logo, no flash. Just quality, self-evident, unexplained. He stopped the way a person stops when they are choosing deliberately to look at something before they respond to it. His eyes moved across the lobby, past the front desk, past the concierge, past the guests who hadn't noticed him yet, and then they landed on Dorothy. He did not look away. Derek, the assistant manager, still on the phone, still making Dorothy stand there while he waited for someone to confirm what she had already told him, turned and froze. The phone receiver stayed at his ear for 2 full seconds after he stopped speaking into it. Then he lowered it. His shoulders, which had carried the comfortable authority of a man in charge of a situation, dropped half an inch. He knew who this was. The front desk clerk knew. The senior staff member with the lanyard knew. Even the security guard with his hand near Dorothy's shoulder seemed to register the shift. some recalibration happening in real time. His full name was Seo Jinho, because the lobby staff knew the name. The hospitality industry knew the name. 3 continents worth of hotel management, real estate development, and technology infrastructure knew the name. What most of them didn't know was where he came from. Seo Jinho was born in Busan, South Korea. Port City, working class, a place where children learn early that comfort is something you build, not something you're given. His mother was a seamstress. She worked from a small shop she rented by the month and took in alterations on the side to cover the difference. She raised him alone. She did not complain about this. She simply worked. He watched her work every day of his childhood. When he was 26 years old, with no family money, no investors, no safety net, he borrowed a sum from his church, the congregation his mother had attended since the week they arrived in Chicago, and he started a company. Technology infrastructure for the hospitality industry. A niche that seemed narrow until it wasn't. The company grew. Then it expanded. Then it became something that required a different vocabulary altogether. Seotech Global now operated across hospitality technology, luxury real estate development, and large-scale philanthropic investment. And among those hotels, acquired quietly, restructured, repositioned, was the Grand Alderton. He owned this building. Every marble tile, every chandelier, every charcoal uniform on every staff member in that lobby. He owned it. And the people who worked inside it had spent the last 16 minutes humiliating a 74-year-old woman who had come to do the right thing. In business circles, Seo Jinho was described 3 ways, consistently, by people who had worked with him or against him. Methodical, private, and when something crossed a line he'd drawn, completely, utterly unpredictable in his response. Not volatile, not loud, the kind of unpredictable that is worse than loud, because it's quiet and considered, and it lands like something final. He had not moved from his spot since stepping out of the elevator. Derek took 1 step toward him, opened his mouth, the beginning of some explanation already forming, and Seo Jinho did not look at him. He walked forward, past the assistant manager, past the senior staff member, past the security guard, who stepped back without being told to. He walked directly to Dorothy. He stopped in front of her, close enough to speak at a normal volume and be heard only by her. He looked at the wallet on the counter. Then he looked at her face, not the way the staff had looked at her, cataloging her, assessing her, but the way you look at someone when you are actually trying to see them. Then quietly, "Is that mine?" Dorothy, who had held herself together through 16 minutes of being treated like a suspect in a crime she had come to solve, blinked once. "Yes, sir," she said. "I found it this morning, on 5th and Monroe. There was a card for this hotel inside." Seo Jinho looked at the wallet for a moment longer. Then he nodded, slowly, the way a person nods when they are processing something that goes beyond the surface of what was just said. He looked at Dorothy again, and something moved through his expression, something that the lobby, the staff, the assistant manager still standing 3 feet away, none of them could read or name. Then he did something no one in that room expected. But before we get to what he said, before we get to what happened next in that lobby, you need to understand something. You need to understand why this moment, this specific moment, this woman, this wallet, this Tuesday morning in November, meant something to Seo Jinho that no one in that room could have possibly known. Because what was happening in that lobby was not a coincidence he was simply witnessing. It was something he had been, without knowing it, waiting for years. That's where this story actually begins. Not in a hotel lobby in November. Not on a sidewalk at 5th and Monroe. 43 years earlier, in a garment factory in the Koreatown district of Chicago, where a 27-year-old woman named Seo Suni sat at an industrial sewing machine for 12 hours a day and told herself it was temporary. It was not temporary. Suni had come to America with her son, a suitcase, and the kind of determination that doesn't announce itself because it can't afford to waste the energy. Jinho was 4 years old when they arrived. He slept on a cot in the corner of a studio apartment on the near West Side, a building that housed, floor by floor, the layered geography of people who had come from somewhere else and were trying to become something here. She worked triple shifts when she could get them. Sewing piecework in the day, alterations at night, whatever the factory needed on weekends. She learned English from the television after Jin-ho went to sleep. She did not complain. Jin-ho watched all of it. Children who grow up watching a parent survive remember it differently than other memories. It goes into the body. It becomes posture, instinct, the way a person holds themselves when the world is being difficult, not breaking, just absorbing. He learned that from her. In the winter of 1985, Suni got sick. It came on gradually and then completely. A respiratory illness that the clinic treated as manageable, but that her body, run down by years of insufficient sleep and insufficient everything else, could not shake. She missed 1 week of work. Then 2. Then the factory gave her shift to someone who could cover it, and suddenly she was home, in the apartment, with a 9-year-old son and almost nothing in the cupboard and no income coming in. She did not tell anyone. That was the thing about Suni. She carried her difficulties the way she carried everything, quietly, internally, unwilling to place the weight of them on anyone else's shoulders. But someone noticed anyway. 2 floors up lived a woman who had been there for years before Suni arrived. Black American. She moved through those hallways as though she had quietly appointed herself the person who paid attention. Miss Dutt never asked Suni what was wrong. She never made it into something that required explanation or gratitude or the complicated negotiation of accepting help from a stranger. She simply appeared at the door each evening with food. A covered plate, sometimes a pot of something warm, sometimes bread, and whatever else she had put together. She would hand it through the door, say something quiet and kind to Jin-ho if he answered, and leave. She did this for 3 months. Every evening. Without being asked. Without making Suni feel the full weight of what it meant to need it. Suni asked her name once, near the end, when she was well enough to stand at the door properly and look the woman in the face. The woman said, "Miss Dot." Just that. Miss Dot. She didn't offer a last name. Suni didn't push. In the language of that building, on that floor, in that winter, the name was enough. It was everything. Suni left that apartment the following year when her hours at the factory were restored and she could afford somewhere slightly larger. She never saw Miss Dot again. The building changed. People moved. The near west side of Chicago in the late 80s was not a place where people stayed still for long. But Suni did not forget. She carried Miss Dot the way she carried Busan, not with longing exactly, but with the permanent presence of something that had shaped her. She spoke of her to Jin-ho throughout his childhood. She spoke of her when he was a young man building his first company. She spoke of her when the company became something neither of them had imagined. She spoke of her in 2019 in a hospital room in Seoul, in the last weeks of her life. "Find her," she told Jin-ho. "Find her and thank her. Don't let me leave without knowing you'll do that." He promised. He hired a researcher. The trail went cold within months. A woman known only as Miss Dot, Black American, near west side of Chicago, mid-80s. The building had been demolished. The records were incomplete. She had never given Suni her last name. The apartment had been logged by unit number, not tenant. Everything predated digital records. The people who might have remembered had scattered across decades. Seo Jin-ho did not stop looking. But the looking slowed. The promise didn't break. Life filled in around it, the way it does. And then he walked out of an elevator in his own hotel on a Tuesday morning in November. He was watching her before she knew he was in the room. The security feed had pulled his attention 16 minutes earlier. A woman being directed to the service entrance, a wallet on the counter. Staff who had already decided what the situation was before they'd asked a single reasonable question. He had come down to see it himself. And then he heard it, the neighborhood she had mentioned when Derek questioned her. 5th and Monroe. Near the bus stop. The near west side. Something in him went still. And then she reached into her coat pocket for her transit card. The card she had planned to use for the return trip home, 45 minutes back across the city on 2 buses, and a candy wrapper fell out. Butterscotch. The wrapped kind. It hit the marble floor without a sound. He watched her bend carefully to pick it up. Watched her tuck it back into her pocket. And then he watched her look across the lobby at the little girl near the concierge lounge. And smile at her, the way you smile at a child when the smile has nothing behind it except warmth. No performance. No effort. Just warmth. Exactly the way his mother had described. He did not have certainty. For a moment, he let it go, told himself it was nothing. He was not a man who moved on feeling alone, and he knew that coincidence was not evidence, and that grief had a way of making the mind find patterns in things that were simply things. And yet, the particular stillness that happens when a part of you that has been quietly waiting for a very long time suddenly stops moving. Not peace, not conclusion, just stillness. He had learned long ago not to trust coincidence. But he had also learned from his mother, from Suni, who had spent 3 months accepting soup through a doorway from a woman she barely knew, never to dismiss grace when it showed up at your door. He stood in front of Dorothy Collins for another moment. Then he turned. He turned to face Derek, the assistant manager, still holding the phone receiver, still wearing the expression of a man trying to calculate which version of events was going to serve him best. Seo Jinho looked at him, and when he spoke, his voice dropped to a register so low and so controlled that the lobby, without entirely understanding why, went quiet. Not a word yet. Just the register. Seo Jinho spoke the way a man speaks when he has already decided, and the deciding was the dangerous part. He looked at Derek. "This woman," he said, "traveled across this city, on a bus in November, to return something that belonged to me." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "And you made her stand at the service entrance." Derek opened his mouth. The beginning of an explanation was already forming. Procedure, protocol, the language of institutions that have decided in advance that process is the same thing as decency. Seo raised one finger. One finger. Waist height. He didn't lift his arm. He barely moved. Derek stopped. The lobby was so quiet that the distant sound of Michigan Avenue traffic through the glass doors became audible for the first time. "I want every camera timestamp from the last 40 minutes, Seo said. "On my desk. Before dinner." He turned to the front desk clerk, the young man with the practiced smile that stopped at the eyes, the one who had looked Dorothy up and down and told her to step aside before she'd finished her first sentence. "You're reassigned to logistics pending a full review." The clerk understood exactly what it meant. His face went the particular gray of someone doing rapid calculations about their immediate future. Then Seo turned to the security guard, the guard who had put his hand on Dorothy's shoulder, who had tightened his grip when she reached into her pocket for a wallet she had carried across the city to return. Seo looked at him for a long moment, long enough to be uncomfortable. "You put your hand on her," he said quietly. "We'll talk about that privately." 3 sentences. No theatrics. No performance. The guard said nothing. There was nothing to say. And then Seo Jinho turned away from all of them. He turned to Dorothy. And something happened to his face that the lobby had not yet seen. Something that the controlled precision of the previous 2 minutes had given no indication was coming. The authority left. Not the presence, not the steadiness, but the edge of it, the part that had just carved through 3 people without raising a hand. What replaced it was softer. And somehow, because of everything that had just preceded it, more striking. "Mrs." He stopped. Waited. "Collins," Dorothy said. "Dorothy Collins." He looked at her. Not the way Derek had looked at her, assessing, suspicious, deciding. The way a person looks at something they had stopped believing they would ever see again. The way you look when something returns to you from a distance so great you had quietly, privately, made your peace with the loss. A pause. "Mrs. Collins." He said her name like it was something he wanted to be careful with. "Would you sit with me? Please." He walked her to the restaurant himself. Not the side dining room used for private events. Not a discreet table near the back. The main dining room of the Grand Alderton, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out onto Michigan Avenue, white linen, the kind of room where every detail has been considered because the people who own places like this understand that where you seat someone is a statement. He pulled out her chair. He sat across from her and signaled the server, not with authority, just a quiet lift of the hand, and asked Dorothy if she had eaten that morning. She said she'd had toast before she left the house. He ordered tea. He told the kitchen to prepare whatever she would like, whatever she wanted, and he said it the way you say something when it is not an offer but a fact. The staff who had stood in that lobby 16 minutes ago, who had questioned her, positioned themselves around her, made her stand at the service entrance in her pressed coat with her transit card in her pocket, watched from across the room. In complete silence. The tea came. The room was warm. Outside, November pressed itself against the glass. Seo Jinho asked her, gently, about her life. Where she had grown up. How long she'd lived on the west side. Whether she had always been in Chicago. Dorothy answered the way people answer when they are still slightly outside their own body. Processing, recalibrating, trying to understand how a Tuesday that had gone so wrong had arrived here, at a table with white linen and a man who had pulled out her chair. And then, carefully, he asked her something more specific. Where had she lived in the 80s? Which neighborhood? Whether she remembered the building on the near west side, the one that had housed, floor by floor, people from everywhere, all of them trying. Dorothy tilted her head. The way a person tilts their head when a door opens that they had not expected to find in the wall. There was a little boy, she said slowly, on one of the floors below me. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. His mama worked so hard. I don't think that woman ever stopped. She got real sick one winter. Couldn't get out of bed for weeks. She paused. I used to bring them food in the evenings. Just whatever I had. Made sure the boy ate. Seo Jinho was very still. You never asked for anything, he said. It was not a question. Dorothy looked at him like the question itself was strange. Of course not, she said. That's not why you do something like that. He nodded once. He looked down at his cup. And then he looked back up at her, and his voice, when it came, was so quiet that the nearest server later said they couldn't hear the words. Only that whatever was said made the old woman's hand move slowly to her mouth. Her name, Seo Jinho said, was Suni. Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. And stayed there. Dorothy's hand was still at her mouth. Across the table, Seo Jinho did not look away from her. He did not fill the silence with explanation or context, or the kind of words people reach for when they are uncomfortable with what emotion looks like up close. He simply waited. And then he reached across the table and covered both of her hands with his. Not quickly. The way you do something when you have thought about it for a long time, and now that the moment is here, you want to be deliberate about it. You want it to mean exactly what it means. My mother talked about you, he said, until the week she passed. Dorothy made a sound, small, involuntary, the kind that comes before crying when the body understands something before the mind has finished processing it. She called you her angel. Not because of what you brought, though she never forgot that either, but because of how you did it. She said you never made her feel like she owed you anything. She said you just appeared. Every evening. Like it was nothing. Like it was just what people did. His voice was steady. Barely. She talked about the little boy you always spoke to at the door. She said you kept candy in your pocket for the children. Dorothy closed her eyes. He stopped. Swallowed once. She would have called you family. The restaurant had gone the particular quiet of a room full of people who have collectively decided, without discussion, not to move. And so do I. He did not say the next thing loudly. He did not announce it or frame it, or give it a preamble that would have softened it into something easier to receive. He said it the way a person says something they have meant for a long time, in the voice of a man who learned from his mother that the most important things deserve to be said plainly. I'd like to call you Mom, Seo Jinho said. If you'll allow it. The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. And then Dorothy Collins, 74 years old, retired schoolteacher, widow, woman who had stood at a service entrance that morning while strangers decided what she was worth, laughed. She laughed, and her eyes were wet, and she shook her head slowly the way you shake your head at something that is almost too much to hold. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had looked at children for 38 years when she wanted them to understand she meant every word. Baby, she said. Just that. Just baby. Your mama raised you right. Seo Jinho looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked up, he did not try to say anything. Near the window that looked out from the restaurant into the lobby, the little girl, the one Dorothy had smiled at across the room while the guard stood close and the manager was on the phone, had climbed down from her chair. Her grandmother was trying, gently, to bring her back. The little girl pressed both hands flat against the glass and watched the 2 people at the table by the window. The man with both hands over the old woman's hands. The old woman laughing and crying at the same time. She watched like a child watches something she doesn't have words for yet, but will remember forever. In the main dining room of the Grand Alderton, On a Tuesday afternoon in November, a 74-year-old woman and a man she had fed soup to through a doorway 40 years ago held each other's hands across white linen. The tea had gone cold. Neither of them noticed. By Wednesday morning, Derek was gone. Not reassigned. Not quietly moved to another property in the Ceotech portfolio with a different title and the same authority. Gone. His termination was processed through HR with the kind of documentation that does not leave room for negotiation. The camera timestamps CEO had requested before dinner were thorough, and they were damning, and they told the story of that Tuesday morning in a language that required no interpretation. The front desk clerk followed within 48 hours. The security guard's case took slightly longer. There were union procedures to observe, representations to hear, but the outcome, when it came, was the same. CEO did not do any of this quietly. That was the part people didn't expect from a man described by everyone who knew him as private. He issued a public statement through Ceotech Global's communications office on Thursday afternoon. It was not written in the careful, hedged language of corporate crisis management. The language designed to acknowledge just enough while protecting the institution from the full weight of what happened. It was direct. It named the incident. It described what Dorothy Collins had done and what had been done to her in return. It used the word discrimination without qualification or cushion. And it said plainly that the Grand Alderton had failed a standard that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with basic human decency. The statement was 4 paragraphs long. It was shared hundreds of thousands of times before the weekend. Within Ceotech, the work that followed was less visible but more permanent. CEO commissioned a dignity and hospitality training program, mandatory, comprehensive, built not around legal liability, but around something harder to teach and more important. The practice of seeing people fully before deciding what they are, who they are, what they deserve. He named it the SUNY program. Not announced publicly. Not placed on a press release. Just named. Inside the company, on the documentation, in the rooms where the training happened. His mother's name, attached to the work she had spent her life doing without being asked. It felt right to him. He didn't explain it to anyone, and no one asked him to. There was one more call made that week. A quieter one. CEO's team located Calvin Collins through a combination of professional directories and contact information Dorothy had mentioned over tea. Calvin was reached by phone on a Thursday evening. The conversation, by all accounts, was brief on CEO's end and considerably less brief on Calvin's. A return flight was arranged. Business class. The ticket appeared in Calvin's inbox with a note that said only, "Your mother should not be celebrating alone." J.S. Calvin landed on a Friday. Dorothy, who had not been told in advance, opened her apartment door and stood in the hallway for a long moment without speaking. Then she pulled her son inside by the front of his coat and held on. She did not ask who had arranged it. She already knew. CEO asked Dorothy gently whether she would allow him to address her living situation. He was careful about how he asked. He had understood something about her from the first conversation, something that the candy in the coat pocket and the pressed clothes and the 2 buses across town had all been saying in different ways. Dorothy Collins had spent her entire life giving without making it anyone's burden, and she would not easily become someone else's project. So he did not offer grandness. He did not arrive with a penthouse or a building or something so large it would have changed who she was to accept it. He arranged for her apartment to be properly retrofitted, heating that worked without negotiation, a bathroom she could move through safely, a kitchen where nothing was held together by the particular stubbornness of someone who had learned to manage without. Warm. Functional. Hers. He set up a fund, structured through a trust, administered quietly, that covered her medical costs and supplemented her pension in a way that meant she would never again do the mathematics of choosing between the prescription and the grocery run. She would never need to ask for it. It would simply be there. The way she had simply been there, every evening, with food 40 years ago on a floor she no longer remembered climbing. She accepted both. She did not make a fuss about it. She said thank you once, clearly, and then moved on. The way a woman moves on from something when she has received it with the full dignity it deserved and doesn't need to perform gratitude to prove the receipt. 3 months after that Tuesday morning, Ceotech Global broke ground on a new community center. It was going up 2 blocks from Dorothy's apartment, in the neighborhood that had been gentrifying around her for years, taking her neighbors, changing her streets, making the place she had lived for 31 years look less and less like itself. The community center was not a gesture. It was a building, real, funded, staffed, designed with input from the people who would actually use it. Programming for children after school. Space for the elderly. A food pantry that would run 6 days a week. CO invited Dorothy to the ribbon cutting. She showed up in a pressed dress the color of deep green, the good one she kept for occasions that required it. Her church hat, wide-brimmed, proper, the hat of a woman who understands that how you arrive somewhere is part of what you're saying. And in her coat pocket, as always, the wrapped candy. Butterscotch and peppermint. For the children. The assistant manager who had made her stand at the service entrance was not there. The desk clerk who had looked her up and down and told her to step aside was not there. The security guard who had put his hand on her shoulder was not there. The people who had treated Dorothy Collins like a problem to be managed, like a presence to be explained and contained and questioned, no longer worked in any building that CO Jin-ho owned. And Dorothy Collins walked through the front entrance of that community center as a guest of honor. Not through the service door. Through the front. The way she should have been received everywhere, every time, her entire life. 6 months later, on the first Sunday of the month, CO Jin-ho arrived at Dorothy Collins' apartment at noon. He brought nothing. She had told him, twice, that he was not to bring anything, and he had learned enough about her by then to understand that this was not politeness. It was an instruction. So he arrived empty-handed, rang the bell, and waited in the hallway the way he had learned to wait, without impatience, without filling the space. She opened the door in her house clothes, and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and told him he was 2 minutes late. He said he was sorry. She let him in. This had become the rhythm of them. The first Sunday of every month, her apartment, her table, her kitchen, her rules. It had started as one lunch, extended by neither of them asking directly, but both of them arriving at the same quiet conclusion. That this was something worth continuing. She had been teaching him Raymond's sweet potato pie. Not from a recipe written down anywhere. Raymond had never written it down, had carried it in his hands the way people carry things learned young, by watching, by feel, by the knowledge that lives in repetition and not in instruction. Dorothy had reconstructed it from memory over the years, and she was teaching CO the same way Raymond had taught her. Standing beside him at the counter, correcting the angle of his wrist, telling him he was rushing the butter, making him start again without apology. He was not a fast learner in the kitchen. She did not make him feel bad about this. He had taught her, in return, a phrase his mother used. Korean, 3 syllables, the kind of expression that doesn't translate directly because the feeling it carries is too specific for a straight translation. Something between I receive this with my whole heart and thank you in a way that goes further than thank you. Soon he had said it, he told Dorothy, every time something moved her. Dorothy practiced it until she had it right. Then she used it quietly, when she thought he wasn't listening. He was always listening. Calvin came for Thanksgiving. He had extended his visit twice since the Friday he arrived and found his mother holding his coat lapels in the hallway. The pull of home doing what the pull of home does when you have been away long enough and something reminds you what you left. He was making arrangements. A lease ending. A job that had run its course. It was slow, the way real decisions are slow, but it was moving. CO joined them for Thanksgiving at Dorothy's table. No blood between any of them. No shared history that went back further than a Tuesday morning in November. A wallet on a sidewalk, 40 years of a woman's memory living in her son's chest. Just a table. Set the way Dorothy set tables, properly, with the good placemats and the glasses that only came out for occasions. Raymond's sweet potato pie in the center, made correctly this time, CO having finally gotten the butter right on the 4th attempt. Calvin's contribution, something he'd found at a Korean grocery because he wanted CO to feel at home, which made CO set down what he was holding and take a moment by the window before he came back to the table. They ate for 2 hours. They talked for 1 more after that. Nobody said anything significant. Nobody needed to. Some debts cannot be repaid, but they can be honored. CO Jin-ho knew that. He had learned it from his mother, who had learned it from a woman on the floor above her, who who never once asked for anything in return, who in your life deserves to be found, not thanked with a text, not acknowledged at some distant, convenient future moment. Found, reached, told plainly, in words they can hold, that what they did mattered, that you carried it, that you did not forget. Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone who showed up without being asked, who did the right thing without an audience, who kept candy in their pocket for the children, share it with them today. They should know. Sometimes grace finds its way home. It takes 40 years. It takes 2 buses in November and a wallet on a sidewalk and an elevator opening at exactly the right moment in a lobby full of people looking the wrong way. It takes all of that. And then it sits down at a table in a warm apartment on a Sunday afternoon, and it lets the sweet potato pie go a little cold while the conversation runs long. And it is worth every year of the waiting.